Mm-mm-mm. Hello and welcome everyone to all the young activists, students, leaders across the globe. My name is Sahar Mohammadzadeh and I'm a 20-year-old young explorer at National Geographic and a student at Harvard. On behalf of National Geographic Education, I am ecstatic to see all of you today and welcome you to our first ever GenGeo Careers and Exploration, which is part of our summer learning series. I first became interested in solving problems in my community in middle school when I noticed a lot of inequities in Kentucky's education system. It didn't take long for me to realize, though, through meetings with lawmakers, superintendents, and policy experts, that I wasn't being taken seriously. At that time, I was just a kid. But I believed I could make a difference through passion, determination, and a strong commitment to the cause. And here at National Geographic Society, we believe that young people are really key to addressing some of the world's most pressing problems. We're members of the Generation Geo community. There's a group of young people who are thinking critically, collaborating globally, and becoming informed leaders, decision makers, and champions of our planet. And we're really focused on how we can support young people to foster those movements, organizations, and inventions that you're already driving. And because at the Society, we believe in the power of science, exploration, education, and storytelling, we think that young people can truly change the world. And right now, we're really at a pivotal moment where passionate young people are leading efforts across the globe to advance science and communities in ways that are going to permanently change our future. But the main question is how can you start to convert that passion into a sustainable and fulfilling career? So this summer, join me every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and I'll be sharing a behind-the-scenes look at the inspiring careers and individuals who bring National Geographic's mission to life. I'll be joined by expert scientists, educators, storytellers, who'll share their experiences, successes, and challenges that have shaped their careers. And today specifically, we are so fortunate to be joined by Dr. Rae Wynn-Grant, who is a large carnivore ecologist. She's worked in Africa with lions in Kenya and Tanzania, grizzly bears in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem, and has worked extensively with black bears in the Western Great Basin. And Rae also informs equity, inclusion, and diversity efforts for the Society for Conservation and Biology. Rae, welcome. It is so nice to see you and welcome you.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. I'm so thrilled to be kicking off the very first GenGeo event. You guys have some great stuff planned, and hi to everybody out there tuning in. I think we have people super young who are getting a really early head start on learning about all of the different options and the stories of people in these fields. And we probably have some pretty seasoned adults who just want to chime in with their questions or get some feedback on how they can inspire a next generation. So it's great to be here, Sahar. Thank you.
Absolutely. Rae, would you mind just getting us started on this conversation by providing a little bit of background and overview of your day-to-day work? What are some of your exciting findings? What have you been up to recently?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to start by saying that one of the things I love about National Geographic is that they use this term explorer, and it means something different for every single person. But one of the things that I love about it is that it also unites a lot of us. So, as Sahar mentioned, some of us are scientists. I myself am one, but you might be an educator, you might be a photographer, an artist, anything like that, and you still get to use this title of explorer, right? You can even be a student. And as long as you are curious and interested in the world around you, you're an explorer. So it's a title that I didn't actually start using for myself until I joined the National Geographic family. But once I did, I kind of was thinking, gosh, why haven't I always been referring to myself as an explorer? And now I use that term for almost everybody I meet who is just interested in the planet and the past, the present, the future, anything. So I am a National Geographic Explorer. In particular, I am a National Geographic Research Fellow. I'm a large carnivore ecologist. Large carnivores are big meat-eating animals. They can be almost anywhere in the world. I mean, sharks are large carnivores, and tigers are large carnivores, and dinosaurs were large carnivores. I particularly specialize in lions in East Africa and also North American bears. And for the most part, I look at their movement and behavior. So when I kind of simplify what I do, I really look at the ways they move through a landscape, in particular landscapes that have a lot of human presence. Because the way a bear might use a forest that has never had a single person in it is really different than the way a bear might use a forest that has hikers and campers and, you know, people hiking with their dogs and whatnot in it. And those differences actually help us understand the ecology of these animals better, which helps us understand how conservation work and how to protect them and keep them around. So I love talking about myself. I love talking about my journey into this career. I'm from the audience. But I did bring some images with me. So if you give me a second, Sahar, I'm going to share my screen so that everyone can see some of the images that I'm talking about. So just 1 second and we'll be right there. All right, so I always like to just point out that although I'm a grown up now, at one point I was a little tiny person. And what sets me apart from a lot of the people in my field, so in wildlife ecology as a field, is that I didn't fall in love with nature because I grew up in nature, experiencing nature. So this is a picture of me in Cincinnati, California, where my family lived for a short time. And I was a little girl, and I think about the most nature I got was digging mud pies in the alley and the side of my house. So I always grew up in big cities and really urban spaces. I had wonderful parents that loved to travel, but we were quite an urban family. So even by the time I got to college and decided to be an environmental science major, I still didn't have real experiences in nature. So I was learning about the environment in the pages of a textbook, which worked pretty well for me, but it really wasn't until I got my first experience in the outdoors that I truly fell in love with it. So I'm not saying that you can't love nature, you can't be sure that you want to have some exciting career in the wild without having been there, because I am an example of someone who didn't grow up doing that. But I am saying the earlier you're able to experience nature or get any kind of outdoor time, I think the more secure you can feel in your field. And one of my missions is to be able to introduce or reintroduce a lot of kids, especially from underrepresented groups or urban environments, to their first or second or third experiences in nature. And so as a college student, I was super fortunate to be able to travel to East Africa for a study abroad experience. I did a wildlife management study abroad program, completely changed my life. So I hope I get some questions about which program that was, because I'm happy to recommend it. And it was a dual focus. And so that's why there's two images here. So I was focused on the movement of African lions in southern Kenya. And then at the same time, I was focused on how the movement and ecology of these lions impacted the local Maasai tribal people whose livelihood was to herd cattle throughout the landscape. So as you can imagine, when a lion sees a cow, they think, oh, that could be lunch. And that's not exactly great for a lot of people whose money comes from the ownership of cattle. So I had to do equal parts of listening to community members, learning from the community, you know, the people who had lived there and whose ancestors had lived there for thousands of years, to learn about exactly what problems they had with wildlife, and then also how we could use science to help fix those problems. So at a pretty young age, I was 20 years old when I went on this trip. It was my first time going on a hike. It was my first time pitching a tent. It was my first time seeing a wild animal at all. And it completely captivated me and really launched me on this career. And so I knew that this is the type of conservation work I wanted to do. I wanted to do large carnivores in landscapes where there are people and human activity. And I did a lot of school. So I show this photo a lot because it represents the very strict academic route that I took. I have since learned that there's lots of different ways to be a wildlife ecologist or to be a conservation scientist or to be someone who works with wild animals. A strictly academic route is what I did, but there's lots of different options of ways to get there. And so I spent a lot of time doing this, reading books, studying, taking tests, giving presentations, that kind of thing. And it really worked for me. But again, when I give advice to all kinds of people who are interested in this, I try to tell them that there's lots of different paths, to get there. And, another thing that people might not realize is that it's a lot of alone time. So I took this picture again and in East Africa doing a lion project, and I use the self timer on my camera because a lot of time is spent driving around by myself looking for these wild animals so that I can track their movements and gather data on where they are and what they're doing. And for some people who really, really want to be around folks all the time, this might sound like a nightmare. And then for other people who feel like they're kind of introverted, it might sound like, the best part of their career. For me, it's a little bit of both. I love to be around people. I love my social time, but I also really don't mind being on my own, especially when it's in a beautiful place. And it is now a full decade ago, I made a really big pivot, or at least a pivot that felt really huge to me. And that was from studying lion movement and behavior in parts of East Africa to studying similar research on bear movement and behavior in North America. And it was a really, really big change in terms of the study systems. I had spent so much time in Kenya and Tanzania. I had learned Swahili. I had lived there. I had made friends. I had gotten to know the ecosystem. And all of a sudden, I was essentially in my own backyard studying a species that is quite abundant in the place that I'm from, but had never seen before. So I was in graduate school when I made this change and started studying these animals. I want to note this bear is a large female bear. She is alive, so there might be some photos of bears that look like this. She is asleep because I gave her a small tranquilizer, which is the best way to just put them to sleep for, half an hour to an hour, enough time for us to give the bear a checkup and then put a GPS collar around her neck. So if you notice that device around her neck, it is a very lightweight collar. And the GPS unit on there is very similar to what we have in our cell phones right here. So it has a GPS unit in there, sends a signal to a satellite in outer space. That satellite sends a signal right back to my computer and lets me know where that bear is every couple of hours in terms of longitude and latitude. From that, I can make a map about where she goes in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year, or in her whole lifetime. That tells me a lot about the habitats that she likes to be in versus the habitats that she avoids. And so, although probably 60% of my time is spent analyzing that data, analyzing those types of movements, about 40% of my time is spent in the field, finding these bears like you see in the picture, and tranquilizing them, attaching a GPS collar. It is a very brief interaction with this animal that allows us to be then very hands-off for a year or two. So being hands-on for a short period so that we can be hands-off for a long period. It's great for science. It's great for understanding the ecology of these animals. And it's also great for making me look like such an awesome scientist in the field. I even have a stethoscope in this picture, which makes me feel like a real doctor instead of one of those, PhD doctors, which is quite different. Another major part of my bear work that I do and that I do with National Geographic is looking at survivorship rates. And survivorship rates start with the little tiny babies. So there is a little black bear cub in my jacket here. And that's because it's the dead of winter, if you can't tell from all of the snow in my hair. And it is the dead of winter when mama bears give birth to their babies. So every black bear in North America that has ever been born ever was born in the month of January, which is, I think, pretty awesome, during the period of hibernation. And once they're just old enough to be handled by people, which is at about 8 weeks old, teams of scientists, including myself, will find the bear den, again, tranquilize the mother so she doesn't get stressed out. And all we do is a little checkup on the babies. My biggest need from these checkups is to just count how many babies were born. How many cubs did this mother bear have? Was it one? Was it two? Was it three? It's usually 2 or 3. And once we do those checkups, make sure they're healthy, see how many there are, which sex they are, weigh them and measure them. We put them right back in the den with mom and leave the scene. In the meantime, while we are doing these checkups, these bears are too small and too young to thermoregulate, which means control their own body temperature. So that's why it is actually a scientific practice to stuff a little bear cub into your jacket while you're doing this work. So it's actually cuddling cubs in the name of science, believe it or not. And the big part of this research is to just see how many cubs were born versus how many cubs are we going to find 6 months later in the summer. So when the mother bear has left her den, when she has gone off and led her cubs around the forest, around their ecosystem, does she still have the same number of cubs? If something is wrong, if there is, if there used to be 3 and now there's 2, that can tell us a lot. It can tell us that there's too much human interference in that area. Maybe a person did something that damaged the animal or endangered them, or maybe there's something about the ecosystem where there aren't enough resources to support the bears. But usually we find the same number. Usually we see a mother gave birth to 3 cubs. In the summer, she still has 3 cubs, and that can show us that she is operating in a healthy ecosystem. Last thing I'll say is that every so often I get these great opportunities, especially now that I've linked with National Geographic, to really broaden my skill set. So I was never one to do work in the tropics, but in the last few years, I've had some great opportunities to do studies in the tropics. This picture is from Madagascar. I'm holding a Madagascar boa, which is a carnivore, but a very different kind than what I was used to working with in terms of mammals. And it's been wonderful to be able to do some of that real exploration and be a beginner all over again in these new ecosystems. I'm super fortunate. And for the most part, you can find me in the Western United States, just enjoying myself and looking at beautiful views like this. I love to show this photo because it's taken in a really great bear habitat. I know it doesn't look like a forest, but it kind of is in terms of Nevada standards. And then we're peering at the Sierra Nevada mountains that separate the state of California from the state of Nevada. And right at the foothills of those mountains is where bears usually come down from the Sierras, but it's also where a lot of farmers have cattle ranches and crops and little homes. So one of the things that I like to say is that bears love the same environments that people love. People love to build homes in the habitats of bears. And I think that can be okay as long as me and people like me are able to do enough science work to understand how we can make coexistence happen, and then make some really good recommendations. So last but not least, I do want to say that when it comes to careers and whatnot, in short presentations like this, it might seem like it's all very linear, that you had a passion for something and you just followed it, and that's where it took you to success. And really, if we were to dig a lot deeper, it's this windy, confusing road a lot of the time with dips and dives, high points and low points. And success kind of becomes this totally different construct along the way. So I hope some of your questions can be about, what were some of the challenges or opportunities along the way, because that's one of the things I really love to talk about. And Sahar, without further ado, I will stop talking about myself for a second and get back to some of your topics. Thank you, guys.
No need to apologize, Rae. Thank you so much. That was amazing. I think it's just so inspiring to learn about the many ways that you've devoted yourself to this field of study domestically internationally, and not to even mention the impact that you've had. In all the ways you've spearheaded this equitable opportunity in conservation biology. I have so many questions, but for all the young people that are joining from home and internationally, we'd love to hear what you're thinking as well. You can share your thoughts by tagging us at NatGeoEducation or using the hashtag GenGeo on Twitter, Instagram, or any type of social media. And be sure to submit your questions too, if you have any for Rae, through the chat bar on our YouTube Live, and we'll address them as they're submitted. Rae, thank you so much for sharing your story. And one of the first questions I have is, you illustrated this in your first childhood picture. You come from a very interesting background. You didn't experience much nature as a kid, but you found your calling in this sector anyway. Can you talk a little bit about your experience entering schools or career paths outside of your current experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to. I don't think I'm that different from a lot of people who are probably tuning in, but I was originally inspired to get to know wild animals through watching TV. So one of the things we did have was a television, and my parents really tried to encourage educational TV watching. So channels like Discovery, like National Geographic, for example, all of those great channels that provided nature shows were what I loved the most. And I remember being a little kid and telling my parents, I want to go to the jungle. I remember just seeing a nature show once and seeing a jaguar and was like, that's it. I need to be in the jungle because this is amazing. And I didn't necessarily know that I was being introduced to science. I didn't know that I was watching science play out on TV. I really just thought like, well, that seems like a cool adventure and like entertaining. That's what I want to do. Maybe I want to be a nature show host when I grow up. And that was really, really important. And I think it really speaks to the fact that passion can be ignited in so many different ways. You know, it might be because you have a little garden in your backyard and deer and bunny rabbits come hopping by, you know, or it might be because you were transported halfway around the world through a television show. Or it might be because your parents took you camping all the time and you got to see bears, you know, like from a distance on your trips. There's so many different ways that we can be become excited about the natural world, whether it means that we want to pursue something about nature for a career, or just the fact that we'll always appreciate it and always want to do our part in protecting it. But I often feel that people from very urban backgrounds are kind of left out of a lot of these conversations because of lack of experience, not because of lack of passion. So I am doing my best to kind of reverse that. And I've had to be vocal about it throughout my schooling and throughout my career to say, you know, just because someone doesn't have the experience doesn't mean they don't have the passion, and doesn't mean they're not asking the right questions to help us make the planet a better place.
Oh, absolutely. And Rae, you mentioned that you decided to go into this career field mostly through education. Would you mind talking a little bit more about that? How did you decide what school you wanted to go to, what graduate schools were on your career path and on your sites as well?
Yeah, my goodness. So, you know, to just be straight up with everybody, I did a bachelor's degree. I have two master's degrees, a PhD. I did a postdoc. I'm finishing a research fellowship. I have taken a very serious academic track through my science career, and it worked really well for me. But at the same time, along the way, it became very, very obvious that some of the people I work with who have probably taught me the most, and the people who interact with wild animals more frequently than I do, did not pursue graduate school. And they are day in, day out in the field, working with animals, especially in this country, in the United States, working with animals like bears, you know, doing the conservation work on the ground, you know, got education in undergrad and maybe went straight into the working world to do that work, or maybe got a master's degree and went straight in. So I'm able to dip into field work, you know, pretty often for an academic, again, about 40% of the year, not a COVID year, but kind of a more regular year. I'm able to be in the field. Um, but outside of that, I have been able to see with my own eyes that there are so many different paths. And for someone who's really, really focused on on action, on conservation action, on actually making change on the ground as opposed to kind of studying it for large periods of time, it might actually be better to get your education and then get in there and start doing the work.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think that today, especially the people that are watching, young people have endless options, and it can be sometimes overwhelming to choose what you want to commit yourself to. Can you tell us a little bit more about your journey in deciding to pursue a career in ecology specifically? And did you have a pivotal moment throughout your life that really helped you navigate towards that option?
Yeah, I have to say I always knew I wanted to study carnivores. I didn't necessarily know I would love studying every type of carnivore because I was really laser focused on lions for a long time. If you asked me what my favorite animal was, it was lions. If you asked me if I ever thought I would do any work with any other species, I would have said no. And I'm so glad that in my graduate experience, I was actually advised by some really wonderful advisors that I had to switch my study system in order to do a better job at my research. And that's when I was introduced to bears. And so, technically, I think this is fascinating, but technically, I started studying bears before I had ever even seen a bear in my real life. So I was, reading about them in books, going back and looking at all the literature, having phone calls with bear experts and studying these bears and admitting to everybody, like, gosh, I've never even seen a bear. I've gotten my hands on tons of lions, leopards, hyenas, all the East African wildlife, but not even the animals that are in my own home state. And so I had a pretty easy time just really committing to carnivores because they're fascinating to me. I think they're a lot like people, right? Like they're hungry all the time. They like to protect their young. They love the same spaces that humans love. There's just a lot about them that is relatable. And at the same time, a lot of large carnivores in the world are highly endangered. So I always wanted to make sure that my work was helping to solve the extinction crisis, helping to understand like how can we keep these animals around. But there are so many different fields of ecology. And, through being in school for so long, I was able to gosh, there are so many different ways that people can be useful in conservation. So whether you want to be a scientist, of course, there's so many different ways to do science. Some of the most important ecology work right now is in the soils. Soil scientists are just changing the world, saving us from climate change, all kinds of great stuff. So whether you want to be a scientist or if you want to be an educator, right? Educators are so important. There's so much environmental education that is needed to, again, like solve this extinction crisis. Whether you want to be an artist, I mean, being a part of the National Geographic family means I have learned and internalized the power of things like photography or filmmaking in exposing people to the natural world and getting them talking about and caring about some of these major environmental issues. Social science, understanding people and cultures and the way they think and the choices that they make. I mean, that makes a huge difference in all of this. And so it's really this beautiful thing that I find that there's really something for everyone in conservation, in exploration, in trying to fight for a better, healthier, more balanced planet. And so all kinds of skill sets are needed and welcome.
Oh, I love that ending to your answer there with the skill sets, because it seems as if you do so much, Rae. You're out on the field every day with large carnivores, but at the same time, you're tracking them, you're analyzing data, and it seems like these global careers are evolving to become increasingly interdisciplinary. And your experience really illustrates that evolution. And your idea, what is an important skill that's critical to your work, but also to most explorers that you've interacted with?
Oh, yeah. So I think without a doubt, the most important, well, I would say there are two things that are the most important, and they're a bit non traditional. But one is the passion, so one is just making sure that you're putting passion ahead of performance. This is something that I really had to kind of unlearn for myself, especially being in academia for so long, where, a lot of academia is so merit based. So it's based on your grades and your test scores. But, a standardized test or a school final doesn't necessarily determine how good you're going to be at problem solving a global crisis, right? Or how interesting your ideas are, or what type of critical thinker you might be, in the environmental movement. And so I think a lot of students, and especially students who are just starting, who might be in middle school or high school, get really intimidated by grades. Like, gosh, if I'm not getting a straight A in this class, maybe I'm not meant for this type of career. I think throw that out the window. Do your very, very, very best to get the best grades you can. I'm not encouraging you to stop doing your homework, but at the same time, understand that passion is way more important than performance, right? What we need in order to solve these problems that we're faced with are smart people with good ideas. And if your good ideas aren't necessarily reflected in your test scores, that's still okay, because we need those ideas and we need that passion. The second thing I'll say is that I learned this the hard way. Self-care goes such a long way. If you are interested in a career in science, exploration, conservation, a lot of that is service. It's service over and over and over again to the world. And you're not going to be your best self. I'm not going to be my best scientist if I'm not taking care of myself and my soul and my heart. And so that means sometimes, putting work down in order to make sure that my mental health is as healthy as possible, as good as possible. It means that when social justice seems to be more important than scientific data analysis, to really center that and really acknowledge it and communicate it in my professional spaces. And I'm so upset that it took me so many years to learn that. But for people who are just starting out, the best thing you can do for the environment is be the best, healthiest version of yourself, so that when you show up for work, so that when you show up for the environment, you are top notch and able to really dig into the work.
Oh, I'm so glad you shared those two skills, especially because it's something that you wish you had known earlier and it would have helped you. Along those same lines, let's pretend, Rae, that for a moment you're back in high school or your first couple years in college. What advice would you give to your past self in retrospect? What critical knowledge would you want to share with people that are watching today?
Yeah, again, I think this might be a little bit non-traditional, because so often, young people, especially at the college age, are given this messaging like to go hard, to get as much experience as possible, to just take all the opportunities that come your way. And I do disagree with that a lot of the time if there's some type of conflict in your personal life. So, I will admit that when I was in college, all throughout college, I didn't do very many internships, but I was a waitress every summer at a restaurant. And it was really important for me to have just a kind of basic side job and make some money for myself and for my family, rather than hustle to do an unpaid internship or to do a volunteer experience. The environmental problems that we're trying to solve today, fortunately and unfortunately, are still going to be around in 1 or 2 or 3 summers when you're ready to fully participate. So for people, especially at college age right now, I just never want anyone to be stressed that, oh my gosh, I didn't get this internship, or, oh, I can't afford to do this volunteer opportunity. There will always be something for you to work on when the timing is right and when you're ready and when you're best prepared. And so it's okay to just kind of take your time to get there, because once you're there and once you're in it, you're going to flourish.
Absolutely. And I really, really resonate with the idea of all these different obstacles and roadblocks that you're having. So along your career journey, what has been the most challenging obstacle you had to have overcome? And what are some of the most important skills you had to utilize to overcome those roadblocks? And among all of those experiences, did you ever really experience doubt?
Oh my gosh. So doubt has definitely come into play so many times. I have worked really, really hard to overcome a lot of self doubt. And I had many different challenges. So I will share that Although I use math and high-level statistics all the time in my work to analyze data, taking those classes and learning and retaining math and statistics was a huge challenge for me. Like from high school through undergrad, through my master's program, through my PhD, just, even today, it's taken extra energy, extra effort, extra humility for me to actually get really good and feel really confident at my math and statistics skills. So I think that's something that is really relatable to many people. Sometimes we think, oh, I can't be a scientist because it requires math, right? And I want to just make sure everyone can dismiss that. You can be an excellent, effective scientist, without being the biggest math whiz. But you have to keep trying, and you have to be honest about where you need help and when you need help, because some of it is non-negotiable. You got to use the math in it, but if you need some help understanding it or doing it on your own, that's really important. So that's like a really basic challenge that I faced. Excuse me. And another one is much more social. So, identity politics has really come into play a lot in my work. So I am an African American woman who these days is studying bears in remote parts of the Western United States. My identity as a Black woman has made me feel really isolated most of the time in my work. So not just when I'm in the field, but even when I'm back at the office, even when I am in my professional spaces, I am one of the few, maybe sometimes one of the only, or the only person like me around. So experiencing sexism, experiencing racism, in the workplace or in my science has been a huge challenge, and sometimes gets me down. But luckily, having this great community of other people like me, maybe working in education or working in physics or working in business or law, but who have similar experiences, allows me to feel like I can make it.
Oh, thank you so much for that thoughtful feedback. And I'm thinking of everyone that wants to go into your field now, especially during the pandemic and the impact that COVID-19 has had on our health and ecosystems. Do you have any hypotheses on the future of your work? How do you see your field of study changing in the upcoming months or years, especially those that are just now getting involved with the field?
Yeah, I mean, COVID has certainly thrown us for a loop. And I think that has touched every single sector out there. Something that has been super, super interesting is that, I study animals that interact with people more than they would like to. And with COVID shutting down national parks, protected areas, a lot of public spaces, actually a lot of the like bears, for example, that I study have been doing really great. Really, really great. It might have been the best year of their lives thus far. They can't get the virus and people aren't out and about, kind of disturbing them. So it's been really, really interesting, although I haven't been able to collect data, just anecdotally knowing that, bears in Yosemite, mother bears have been able to emerge from hibernation with their cubs, walk down the road and not worry about their cubs getting hit by cars. That's fascinating. It's not necessarily sustainable because we're hoping that our world gets back, in order and on track the way we know it. But it is really, really interesting as this kind of little case study, to see how at a time when there's so much human suffering, that the natural world is able to flourish in this really interesting way. I think it teaches us a valuable lesson, but it's going to be hard for us to reconcile, how we go about reducing human suffering, but still making sure that we're uplifting the environment and nature. In terms of the future of the work, there's a lot that's uncertain. So I still feel fortunate doing so much of my research in the United States, where conservation efforts have had huge gains, right? There was a time when black bears and grizzly bears were near the brink of extinction. And today they're doing better than ever. We have more of them than we've had in, 100, 200 years. So there's a lot that's looking good. I know that when I was a kid, bald eagles were on the brink of extinction and we didn't think we were going to have them anymore. And now if you go to so many amazing wild places, you'll just see bald eagles soaring and they're no longer, at risk of something bad happening to them. At the same time, in other parts of the world, we're not so lucky, right? So we have, if I take tigers as an example, it looks like we might have less than 1,000 tigers left in the wild. There's a huge urgency there for us to make some huge changes, to figure out how we can protect their habitat, how we can protect these animals, while human populations continue to grow and thrive and be sustainable. So again, we just really need every type of critical thinker involved, whether you have a formal training, an informal training, whether you're an artist, you're an educator, you're a scientist, you're a kid, whatever, you're a volunteer, a senior citizen, whoever you are, if you have ideas, if you can put your energy and effort into helping us with wildlife extinction crisis, we need you more than ever.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Rae, for taking those times and those thoughtful responses. I do want to take the time though to post some questions from the audience as well. We have people joining in from Texas, Las Vegas, and India. One question in particular from Sanjit Tiwari from India asks, how have Explorer grants helped you in your career? And what's the importance of getting a grant other than just fundraising at large?
Oh my goodness, this is such a good, very National Geographic specific question. So I'm so glad you asked it. In order to be a National Geographic explorer, you need to have a grant from National Geographic Society. National Geographic Society is the nonprofit grant-making arm of the company National Geographic, and it's where my work is based. Sahar, it's where your grant came from as well. And they have been around for more than 100 years, giving out all this money for science and exploration. It's an amazing organization. And so I would not be doing this work, I would not have the title of Nat Geo Explorer without having a grant. The great thing is if you get approved and you get a small or medium or large grant from National Geographic, you get to become a Nat Geo Explorer and you get to use that title for the rest of your life. Whether you get one grant from them and it just starts your career, or whether you continually receive grants from them over time throughout your entire life, you will always be a Nat Geo Explorer. So it's made a huge difference for me. Research takes funding, right? So I don't just have to have funding in order to travel to my field site, but the GPS collars that I attach to large carnivores cost a lot of money. They provide tremendous amounts of data, but I can't pay for that out of my pocket. So I depend on organizations like National Geographic to give me grant money when they approve it, so that I can buy the supplies, the devices, the tech I need in order to gather the data that I need. So I recommend all kinds of people explore the possibilities for grants at National Geographic Society. So that's nationalgeographic.org. They have a great webpage that can help you understand which types of grants you're eligible for. You can start very, very young. So they have early career grants for people who are just getting started, even before college, even when you're a teenager or younger. And it never ends. Your eligibility never ends. So definitely get in there, get into that website, ask questions, and explore that.
No, absolutely. And right, in addition to that, you mentioned that your work is, very, very, 24/7 sometimes. You're on the ground, you're working with actual carnivores on a day-to-day basis. It's a lot. What for you is your driving force that gets you out of bed every single morning and says, I really want to commit my time to doing this today. This is something that I'm very passionate about.
Oh my gosh. I definitely feel like the luckiest person in the world that I get to have fun for work. So I find what I do very, very, very fun. Sometimes it is daunting. Sometimes it is like very time consuming. Sometimes it takes me away from home for a really long period, but it is work that I love so much. And that is definitely something that keeps me going. Also, I really believe that we can solve some little problems. And if we're able to solve a bunch of small problems, that can potentially build up to us solving some really, really major, really global problems. And doing work for the environment is also doing work for people. So a lot of what I'm doing is trying to figure out coexistence, which means protecting animals, but also protecting people in the spaces where there are animals. So that includes anti-poverty work, that includes social science work, it includes education work, for people too. So there's a lot that's, of like equity and justice that is a part of my driving force and a part of my science, which makes me really committed to it day after day after day, even when I get tired. And when I get too tired, trust me, I put stuff down for a while and just kind of give myself a chance to reboot.
It's all about that work-life balance. And it's so lucky to say that you are doing something that you love to do for fun, for work, and it all comes together for you. And you talked a little bit about your social responsibility, but also your scientific endeavors. When you're balancing these two at hand, another question we have from the audience is, how do you choose between your scientific facts and social responsibilities that you have? Is there a balance between them, or do you try to not ever favor one over the other?
Oh, that's a really, really great question. That's a really great question. So it is a constant struggle for me because sometimes there are things that I believe in or don't believe in that my science doesn't necessarily reflect. And it can be really, really tough. And so I really value my ability to do science communication as a way for me to distinguish, what was, data and what is my belief system. Just being able to talk about it publicly, to admit it, to do some writing, to do some public speaking, to just share both sides of that. I'll give an example. I mostly work with species where in some places you can hunt them. And I have my own personal beliefs about hunting and the way hunting can be done and whether it should or shouldn't. But sometimes the data that I'm collecting and the data that I'm analyzing will make a different suggestion about, what type of hunting can be tolerated for a population to still remain healthy. And so I really find that, at least right now, I'm able to do this work, sometimes be surprised by my results, but then make sure that when I'm communicating the work, I'm bringing my full self and my belief system to that communication without messing with the data or changing things around. It's a bit easier for me because I'm working at such a macro level. For example, I'm doing macroecology. I know there's people who might be in more medical fields and they're dealing with like huge ethical problems. And it's a constant challenge, but checking in with yourself and your heart and your soul to make sure that you feel okay about the choices you're making and the work you're engaging with is super, super important. At the same time, if you're at a point in your career, and again, make sure you're protecting yourself, but if you're at a point in your career where you're willing to take a professional risk, sometimes speaking up and speaking out is exactly what you need to do. There's a lot about how conservation in at least the United States got started, some of the foundations and principles of it that were very, very set in a colonial context. And could have even been harmful to groups of people, in particular people of color, in particular indigenous people in North America. And speaking out about that to me is super important, super, super critical, but it's not necessarily welcome in all spaces. So doing the work to try to dismantle that colonial nature of conservation is also something that I try to bring into my science, but at the same time, I try to protect myself from professional costs.
That was a very, very thorough and well thought out answer, Ray. Going forward, what do you think is the most important thing that young people can do from home right now? In what ways can we truly start to immerse ourselves in this work in conservation and explore our interests given our current circumstances?
Yeah, to me, this one is easy. It's just learn. It's really, really just, do as much learning as you're available to do. So, make sure you're not stressing yourself out or your family, make sure that you are comfortable and doing everything you need to do to be safe, happy, and healthy. And if those bases are covered, learn as much as you can. The internet is a valuable resource. Again, I got my start just watching TV shows to learn about nature. In especially the American context, I always recommend voting. If you are 18 or older, please get out there and vote in favor of the environment. If you are under 18, please think about ways that you can encourage voting for the environment. That's super, super important. Because even some of the species that I study are under threat by different administrations, and we can make a difference just with the power of voting. But certainly just being as informed as you have the capacity to be is really important. If you have all day long to learn about a new species every hour, do it. Or if you're just able to, get one little fact into your head every couple of weeks, that's a serious improvement, and it sets you up to be a great participant in environmental movements.
Wonderful. I'm just going to start learning everything as I can starting now. What is the best way, right, for us to stay informed about our own time and our own management? How do you manage the times that you're low or might not be having the same excitement or fervor about your work when things might not be going exactly to plan? In what ways do you continue to be determined and think on your feet?
Yeah, well, I get a lot of energy from people younger than me. So I still feel like I'm in the early part of my career, but I think at this point it's actually the mid part of my career. And being able to mentor folks younger than me, folks in high school, in college, maybe even in graduate school, and understand that they are so passionate that they are developing their ideas and figuring out how they can contribute to this work makes me energized, especially when I feel tired and I think, God, are we going to reach these goals by the time I have to stop working? Knowing that there are so many people, more people than ever, probably, and more different kinds of people than ever coming up behind me, behind my colleagues, to get ready to do this work and fight the fight makes me energized and gives me so much hope that we're going to make it.
Oh, that's such a hopeful outlook. And I think I could agree more. Always being surrounded by youthful peers that are always so optimistic and have a new perspective on how to tackle systematic issues is always invigorating. Rae, what's the best way for us, for me, audience members from around the world to stay informed about the work that we are doing? How do we follow up or stay in touch and learn more about you?
Oh, absolutely. Well, thank God for social media, because when I was looking for my heroes, early in my early days, social media wasn't a thing. The internet was barely a thing. So it's so much easier these days. I love posting about where I am, what I'm doing, what it looks like, even when it's not that glamorous, even when I'm, handling bear poop instead of an actual bear. I love sharing that. So I believe my handle should be down here in one of the scroll bars. It's at Rae Wynn-Grant. Stay informed with what I'm doing. I also have a website, raewyngrant.com. And more than anything, National Geographic does such a great job profiling their explorers, making sure everyone knows what folks are up to, what cool work they're doing, giving people speaking opportunities, and like this one, for example. So I think it's pretty easy between social media, websites, National Geographic. It's easy to know what I'm up to and what I'm doing.
Wonderful. So I'll be sure to be following you in all those different platforms. But as soon as you hang up on this call, Rae, what is something that you're looking forward to doing in the next couple of weeks and months? What's the next big, exciting event that you're preparing for and starting to learn more about and immerse yourself in?
Oh my gosh. Well, I actually have a top secret research project that I'm developing that I wish I could tell you about right now, but I can't. But if I were to give you a little hint, there's a part of North America that was once home to grizzly bears and now has no more grizzly bears, but is home to black bears. And it appears that although the black bears didn't historically live there, they've kind of replaced grizzly bears in this ecosystem. But there's a lot of plans to maybe bring grizzly bears back into this ecosystem. And so we're not quite sure what will that mean for grizzly bears and black bears that have never lived in the same space before. So it's a pretty nerdy question, but it is just making me so excited because I'm going to have the opportunity to answer it. It's a really unique ecosystem. It's a really unique set of research questions. And I can't give away too much more, but it is my next big research project to tackle, and it's just making me very, very excited. So that is actually coming up later this summer. And that is what I can't wait. That's the next great thing that I'm going to tackle.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. And I think that's a great teaser. So it makes sure that we're going to be focused and following up with your work in order to understand what this big secret is that's going to later be unveiled. But Rae, thank you so, so much for your time. I think I speak for myself, for everyone watching, that all of your work and advice and words of engagement are particularly insightful and timely when it comes to our current circumstances. I want a little bit forward going up with this. Are you still working with National Geographic, or is there a way in which you can continue your engagements with other institutes or colleges along the way as well? As part of the National Geographic Society, do you find yourself into this section specifically, or can you find yourself in a lot of different platforms and engagements?
Yeah, another great question. Because people like me are grantees of National Geographic Society, it usually means that our home base is at a different institution. So Nat Geo funds my work and gives people like me these wonderful grants to do the work, but it doesn't prevent us from working with different organizations on whichever projects we want and having all kinds of really cool opportunities. So it's another great reason to get involved with National Geographic Society as early as possible as a grantee. Whatever your idea is, send it into them. See if they'd be willing to fund it. And then the opportunities are truly endless. So I feel very fortunate that although National Geographic is my main funder for my research, I have opportunities to work with all different kinds of groups all over the world if I want to, all in the name of conservation.
Oh, that's so wonderful. And as I'm reflecting on all the things you said in the past hour, what's really most clear to me is that our world is facing a lot of unprecedented challenges. We're going through a global pandemic, an ongoing fight for racial equity, a climate emergency, a refugee crisis, just to name a few. And while all of these challenges are taking so many different forms, I think a lot of them require that same passion, creativity, and most importantly, urgency that you're bringing to the table. So that idea of don't wait, apply now resonates extremely well with our young folks. In closing, I do want to take the time to share a couple of findings that I found really insightful from the Institute of Future, which found that up to 85% of jobs that today's college students will have in about a decade haven't even been invented yet. So that's to say that ingenuity, imagination, flexibility, and pursuing our passions, like you mentioned, ought to be at the forefront of our educational understanding. I think your reflections have really shown me how to solve a problem is more critical than pursuing a specific career. And a lot of young people need to embrace that unknown and what comes naturally, and that there's always room to grow for your passion and explore that uncharted territory. And it's with this understanding, I think, that the National Geographic Society is working to ensure that these young leaders continue to have the global understanding, geographic knowledge, and kind of civic skills to solve our world's most pressing problems. And I think that our global challenges can only truly be overcome when we start to meaningfully bring together young people to the table and support them with the tools that they need to find those solutions and invigorate others that are already in the field, as you mentioned. So, Rae, thank you again. And for those watching, please make sure to share your thoughts by tagging at NatGeo Education or using hashtag GenGeo on social media. If you're available at Fridays at 2 p.m., you can join the Photo Camp live sessions that are also focused on connecting storytellers with natural featuring photographers, Federico Pardo and Malika Vaz. So it's another opportunity you guys can put up on your calendars. Again, next week, Tuesday, June 30th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time, I'll be back here with a discussion with educator Katvya Gupta on the unconventional career pathways that exist in education. But until then, Rae, thank you so much for joining us. It was such a splendid conversation. And thank you so greatly for you to join us. And until then, anyone else that's watching, stay curious, and we hope to see you next week.
Thank you so much, Sahar. This was an awesome conversation. Thank you for all the great questions from the audience. And keep all of these great events coming. I know I'll be tuning in.
Great. Thank you so much. See you guys next week.